Welcome, everyone, to another very fun summer special on Royals, Rebels, and Romantics. We have a real treat today. We are going to be speaking about a couple of absolutely fantastic, fun, enjoyable, and literary-minded fictional accounts of a group of people many of us know well, and it's the Jane Austen crowd. Anyway, it's going to be so fun. So I want to thank and welcome Claudia Gray, who is with us, as well as our own Lindsey Lindstrom, our creative director. And we are going to be talking about two books, and you can see one behind me, The Murder of Mr. Wickham, and also The Late Mrs. Willoughby, which I do have on my Kindle. It's just not quite as visually appealing. But those names probably sound familiar. And so what we're going to do is meet some of our most beloved characters in a new way and in new situations. And I'm so excited. So Lindsey and I are going to have this fun conversation with Claudia, and we're thrilled that you are here to join us. So Lindsey, why don't you get us started?
Okay.
And I will say, I want to give Lindsey the credit. Lindsey's the one that found this book and sent it to me and said, you must read this, you will love it. So
great.
Yeah, this is one to definitely share with your friends. So thank you again, Linz.
No problem. Well, I am so excited to be a part of this chat. I absolutely loved both The Murder of Mr. Wickham and The Late Mrs. Willoughby. It was honestly such a treat to be able to be with these beloved characters again and to be back in their world. And we obviously are very very glad that you chose the world of Jane Austen for the setting of these books. But there are a lot of other literary worlds, like, the Brontes or Dickens or Shakespeare or whoever, right? What drew you to Austen's world?
I think I was introduced to her in high school when I wasn't quite ready for her yet. But then I rediscovered her in college and was just really starting to become a fan in, I'm dating myself here, 1995, which of course is the Annus Mirabilis of Austen adaptations. We got three of the greats.
Right.
And from that time on, I have been a devotee. And there was a long period of time when my smartphone ownership was fairly new and before Libby and such. But the only books I had on my phone for a few years were her 6 published novels. And so anytime I was standing in line or waiting at the airport or whatever, I was reading one of the books. And as soon as I'd finish one, I'd find the next one that I hadn't read in the longest, take that out, read it. So I did a deep dive, and I didn't realize it was in preparation for this, but that did have a role to play. And then the way that I got started on this book was, it was very deliberate. I forget how many years ago it was, somewhere between 10 and 15 years ago, the great P.D. James releases Death Comes to Pemberley. And to say that I was psyched for this book is a real understatement. I was like, they're going to kill Wickham. Everybody in Pride and Prejudice has a motive to kill Wickham. This is going to be unbelievable. And then these are spoilers for a book that is more than a decade old, but they do not kill Mr. Wickham. And I was just like, what the? I could not get over it. It's a good book. It just wasn't the book I'd gotten super psyched for. And this experience taught me that when you have that kind of reaction to material, it doesn't mean necessarily that the creator made a bad choice. It can also be your creative self knocking. And so, because I was going, well, if it had been Wickham, then see, this person would want this. And over the years, and it was years, the idea sort of changed shape. I thought I might do it as fan fiction for a long time, really.
Mm.
And then I realized I wanted to tie together everybody from all the books. And there was like, well, in that case, who might do it? And once I had an answer, then I had a plot. So it wasn't like, oh, I have a mystery. Whose world will I put it in? It was being very much engaged with the Jane Austen and with a mystery set in her world that made me realize, like, oh, I think there's another path to take, and I want to take it.
Yeah, that's awesome.
That is great. And it looks
Yeah,
like,
forgiven.
Yes, your dog has joined, which is great, which is great. So you mentioned something just kind of in passing, and I want to talk a little more about that, because if anyone hasn't read the books yet, the idea that someone is killed and someone is a killer might not seem like a typical way to reimagine Jane Austen. I mean, we know that Jane Austen has been reimagined in all kinds of ways. And I just got not too long ago another version called Dating Mr. Darcy. And there are a lot of Jane Austen, recreations, but most of them are not murder mysteries. So you mentioned you decided, sounds like you decided on the victim quite early on, because that's what you had wanted.
Yes, that was the origin of it all. Wickham must die.
Wickham must die. And there are clearly a lot of really good suspects if you bring the gang together. So how did you decide on who would be the killer? Because as I was reading it, I was going back and forth and thinking maybe somebody snuck in. But how did you, because you said that gave you the plot, but how did you make that decision? Did that just happen all at once, or did you have to kind of massage the character into it?
I this is tricky without spoilers, but all right. Peach has had to do some sneezing there. Without spoiling it, it was who would do this. I knew it would be a cop out with this one if the killer wasn't one of the characters that we know.
Right.
But I had to ask who would do it and under what circumstances. Who is it in character for? Because we love these people. These are decent people, even if they've been really tested by the actions of others. And it was the only person that it could be. I thought. So that's as much as I can get into it. But it wasn't like, oh, let me think, what would be amusing, and then I'll try and justify that. It was like, would any of these people do it? And if so, why? And
right.
when I had a yes, then I had a story.
Okay. And it is really interesting, the tipping point or the pushing point that could drive a character to take that step. And what's interesting is, as you look at, I mean, even if we just do the world of Pride and Prejudice, we can get to quite a few people. And as you bring in other characters, they also had all these motives. So it was really interesting. All right.
Yes. So no, I was just going to say on that last note that's definitely something that, I too was like, oh man, who's going to do this? I don't know if I can take it. If it's someone you love these characters, how can I deal with it? But no, I thought it was done so well. And you're right. It like totally fit. Like you can't see it happening any other way. I think it just was such a great, anyway, you're awesome. Thinking on that.
Thank you. No, thank you. Be worried.
But so anyway, so being a big fan of Jane Austen, I'm a fan too, obviously, we all are, I think. But something I really appreciated about your books was how true to the originals you were. And I loved that the characters behaved or experienced things that felt really plausible and natural to who they were or what they went through in their original novel. So how did you approach writing a new story and sometimes new characters into an existing framework while remaining true to the source?
That was important to me because, I mean, it's it's a murder mystery, but I also wanted it to feel like a sequel, like you are catching up with these people afterward. And part of the reason that I did what I did at the beginning of the book, which is where I explained where in the Regency period I had set each of Jane Austen's books, which roughly, though not exactly, follows, you know, the order in which she wrote them. We only have a definite date on Persuasion. But part of that was so that when I wanted to ask, when would it be most interesting to catch up with these people? I want to see what's going on with them when exactly. And, you know, with Elizabeth and Darcy, they really have such a tremendously strong bond and openness that's created in that book that I thought will be well into their partnership, you know, I think before we run into something that actually could cause a problem for them. Whereas, you know, I want to see Marianne falling in love with Colonel Brandon. So, you know, fudge the time on a little bit to have that be the thing that had happened most recently, etc. So that was important to get at something that with each couple, I guess, that would deal with flaws and issues that they have in the original novels. Jane Austen was a great observer of human character, and I think she understood, like, we don't tend to completely overcome our flaws. The flaws just have to get a lot sneakier to get at us, but there they are, you know. It takes more to get these things. But is Emma going to ever 100% stop meddling? No, but now she's meddling in the way that was expected, as you can see in every other Jane Austen novel, by inviting young eligible people to meet each other. That was the kind of meddling she's supposed to be doing. And it was good to ask, like, what happens the one time Mr. Knightley thinks he needs to take a step? You know, how to, you know, what can lead him to do that? And also, how does Emma react when she's the one who's seeing this from the outside? You know, the whole question of how much Brandon's past affects him in the future. I mean, that is one of the things that you have to come to believe in Sense and Sensibility, is that he loves Marianne for herself and not because she reminds him of Eliza. And I felt like, you know, I feel like, yes, that argument is there to be made, but I was excited to get to make it, you know, so on and so forth. I wanted, the goal was that of all the characters that we've met before, the fundamental things we see them grappling with in these books are things that they grapple with in the original. It's just a more complex version, a more adult version, the kind of thing that you run into down the line. And, you know, what does it take for that hard-earned wisdom to come back in and kick in again?
Yeah, and that's really interesting, because I think Sense and Sensibility in particular, and you mentioned this, ends with a lot of questions about Brandon's past and Mary Ann's place and Willoughby's, you know, sliding up against that. I mean, that is really interesting. So as you take these characters sort of into the future, and you're taking them, as you mentioned, Elizabeth and Darcy go further, they're you know, older, and then, you know, you've staggered, which is just such a great idea. And that's how you get everybody in the same place, you know, which all just really felt real. So as that happens and as that unfolds, and as you're writing it, did any of the characters surprise you as you're writing them, or did they seem to be, you know, I mean, I know you're bringing them alive, but were you surprised as you were doing so? Were any of them acting in ways, I mean, I know you had the, you know, the ultimate, and if we're thinking about the murder of Mr. Wickham, the ultimate moment where someone decides to, you know, but other than that, perhaps, did other characters surprise you at all as you were exploring their futures?
It wasn't as much the characters surprising me as it was really surprising to me that they were all, it seemed to me, talking to me in their own voices, like right away, that I wasn't having to sit and go like, oh, but Elizabeth would be witty. Like when I was trying to be Elizabeth, all of a sudden some wit would show up. I'm like, where is this in my day-to-day life?
Right.
I love this. So that really struck me. I thought, wow, that is great. Like, I don't know that I consciously could have said, like, makes me feel like Mr. Elton's voice, how it differs from Edmund Bertram's voice. But when I wrote a scene with the two of them together, I was like, oh, that's what that is. So that was really fun. And even though it wasn't the events that surprised me about writing Fanny and Edmund from Mansfield Park, it surprised me how much I enjoyed that. You know, Fanny Price is very much not what we want modern heroines to be. That was, you know, she was a character type that was very honored and common in the Regency era, but not so much in ours. She's kind of frail. She's very timid. She's very pious. She takes one stand in the whole book. And of course, that's everything that the plot steers around. And, you know, when I was thinking like, okay, what do I write for? I had to ask, what makes her take a stand against Edmund, which is almost an unthinkable thing for her to do. But then I thought, well, okay, I see one thing that's so important to her that she could do that. And so I knew that that was a storyline, and I thought that that was believable for her, but I was surprised how much I enjoyed writing that and how interesting that was to me. I just wouldn't have thought like, yeah, Mansfield Park, that'll be the one that's like such a thrill to dig into, but it worked out that way for me.
Yeah.
That is really interesting because you're right. That one that character could feel a little more dated than some of the others, and a little more Regency focused, but that was an interesting, I love the way you asked that, what would make her take a stand? And there could be, and it was very believable that this would lead her to say no to him. So that's great. That's really good.
I'm glad you felt that way. That was the hope.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, I know Fanny is not one of my more favorite characters. That's not one of my top books of Jane's, but I do find it interesting that you're saying that that was an enjoyable one for you to write, just in the sense of to read it, like Caroline was saying, it did feel very believable. And I actually think that was more enjoyable to read than the original one. Sorry. But I did connect, I think, better with Fanny. Fanny. through that look at her character.
Yeah, I mean, I think fans agree, like Mansfield Park is one where she doesn't quite stick the landing. But in some ways that book is very fascinating to me precisely because of that. Because, you know, there is so much left unsaid about what happens between Edmund and Fanny that Jane Austen just set me up. She had put all of this material out there, and then I got to put, you know, the last Lego blocks in place. So that was a treat.
And that is interesting. I think sometimes Jane deliberately leaves us with some questions.
I think so too. Yeah.
So we're really happy to have these answers. These are the answers we like. But they all end up in the murder mystery.
Exactly. So looking at more specifically at characters, Mr. Wickham is notorious in the world of Austen, right? But Mrs. Willoughby is relatively unknown. How was it different to create a dramatic death with a character that, going into your book, readers may not have strong opinions on, or may not even know very much about?
Her. Well, I mean, the thing with Mrs. Willoughby, it isn't so much who she is, it's the role that she plays in these people's lives. She represents Willoughby's wrongdoing. This is, you know, she is the choice that he made, and she's stuck embodying that. And while we definitely are given solid information from Jane that, you know, Sophia is not the easiest person maybe to get along with, I also thought, so, you know, imagine you are Sophia, and you know, and here you are at the party with your fiance, and this girl comes running up to him, and you discover at this point, like, oh, was he in love with somebody else? And the recognition over time that he had married her more and emotionlessly, you know, I mean, material concerns were a factor in that era. And, you know, it was not hollow for these people to at least go like, well, okay, that's something that we can live on. That was just part of the math of the era. But for him, like, there doesn't seem to be any feeling about Sophia at all. And what is it like to discover that for her? And so my hope was that, I mean, the thing about her death that really matters is the effect that it has, because once Willoughby's available again, it's a destabilizing force in the town of Barton and all the people that we know there. But I also wanted, before her death, to set up that even if there are things about her personality that are unlikable, she is somebody else that Willoughby has put in a terrible position.
So true.
Right. I thought it was sympathetic. I felt more sympathy actually for her in this version than I guess I really hadn't so much. She seems like more of a reason in Sense and Sensibility, but here I did feel like she was hurt too. You know, he used her too. So
yeah, he absolutely did. And, you know, when she's, you know, publicly engaged to him, which she is, you know, she has to kind of fight for him. She can't have him leave her, because then she becomes very difficult for her to find somebody else. And I also wanted, because, you know, Willoughby, that whole big dramatic scene at Marianne's sick bed where he's like, you know, Sophia made me write that letter. You know, she's the one who put all the mean things in it. You know, I tend to be like Eleanor, who at the time she's like, I'm really sympathizing with this, and then the next day she's like, wait, hold on. But you know, I have a line in Willoughby with Sophia thinking that she had to write that letter because he would have been so wishy-washy that Marianne would not even have known whether it was a yes or a no. The kindest thing to do was to be clear. Which, you know, I think there's truth to that. So anyway, so that was about getting.
Claudia, we're not hearing you very well.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, there we go. Yeah, that's
sorry.
great.
I just moved the computer like the tiniest little bit, but apparently took you out of focal range.
Yeah.
Oh my, sorry.
No, that's great. That's fine. No, that's really interesting, because yes, you're right. In a way, that is the kindest thing to do to Marianne, is to have her really know. So I really did enjoy that way of looking at it. And she does. She has no choice but to keep him. So yeah, that was fascinating. Oh, that's great.
Glad you enjoyed.
Yes. Now we bring in addition to these characters we've been talking about, the ones we know, we bring in some new generations. And so I want to talk a little bit about a couple of, and I say that word couple because we're sort of thinking, ooh, what's happening here? You know, but Jonathan and Juliet, which I really love. But let's talk a little bit about Jonathan Darcy, because when you imagine Elizabeth and Darcy having children and what that would be like and how they would respond to it, and the expectations that both of them would have, you know, you see both of them as loving people, but also people who have very high expectations for themselves and for others, both of them. And Elizabeth can be pretty dismissive, and we know Darcy can be pretty dismissive of people who aren't up to their expectations. And so when they have a son who doesn't I don't want to say doesn't fulfill expectations, but who is different, who is maybe not the son they expected, what was that like writing, and how does that help us as readers really have this very rich experience with someone who doesn't fit in? You see it in both of the novels. There are ways, and you know about the bullying in school and all of this kind of stuff. So tell us about Jonathan and what went into the creation of that character.
My first thought with Jonathan was just that he would be more Darcy than Darcy. You know, somebody that fits William Darcy would say, like, just relax. You know, if there it would be such a being, you know. So that was, you know, when I was writing the first chapters and sort of getting the feel of it, that was all that was in my head. But then sort of when I had that together for the first time and was reading through, you know, that's the point you have to ask, well, why? You know, why is he even stiffer than Darcy, growing up with Elizabeth for a mother and in a happy home, etc. And I realized, I was like, if I were coming to this, you know, cold, and I was just the reader, I would ask myself if this character was neurodivergent. And then I really thought about that for a while, because, you know, on the one hand, there would be a lot of things about this that would be incredibly difficult because nobody in that era has that reference,
right?
That frame of reference. They don't understand that they are going to believe that most of his needs and habits are willful choices on his part, when they very much are not. So that would make things very difficult for him. But on the other hand, obviously this is not true for all neurodivergent people, but for many, a sense of order and routine is very important. And I thought, this is somebody who can know exactly what's going to happen throughout his day for pretty much any day of his life. Even if it's, you know, something that doesn't happen often, like a ball, he knows exactly what the dances are, what the steps are, how long he will be touched, how he will be touched, when he can break away, you know. And, you know, also being the heir of Pemberley, he has, you know, he can actually make the world move at his tempo in some way. And so I thought, okay, there are interesting sides to this. You know, now I am not on the autism spectrum myself, so I wanted to be careful. So I read, you know, happily we're in an era when a lot of people have written books, when there are a lot of essays online, there are online forums, etc., when you can actually hear from autistic people themselves describing their experiences and also things that they do and don't connect to when they see these characters in fiction. And we also got an authenticity read on both of these books that was hugely helpful. You know, so far it seems like response has been good to that. It is definitely something that I'm aware of, and it's not, you know, it's not like he's suddenly not going to have the same difficulties as we move forward in time. This is who he is.
Right.
And it was also interesting to have, it's interesting that you talk about how both Darcy and Elizabeth have pretty high expectations. And I think that's true. And I actually think with their younger sons, this may sometimes actually be a bit of a problem with them in parenting. But both Darcy and Elizabeth do understand that Jonathan authentically needs more. And I wanted to portray them as, even though they do make mistakes and they don't understand, they don't have this frame of reference, they have actually been very good parents for him to have. They are fairly understanding, even if they don't get it right all the time. It's something that they've had to figure out. And I think that in particular also comes down to Elizabeth to a degree. Not that Darcy is not loving and great, but I do think she is able maybe a little bit more to go, okay, we don't do things the conventional way with him all the time because it doesn't work. So that was the goal with him.
Well, that's so interesting. So I was aware in the Mrs. Willoughby book when he's sort of negotiating how long he's going to stay at the very beginning, when he's going and he's saying, they've invited me for this long, I'll stay about 2 weeks. And in his mind, he's thinking a week and 1 day, a week and 2 days, a week and 2 days is about to, and so you can see his, but you do see, and I do remember at one point thinking, oh, he's lucky to have Elizabeth and Darcy versus some of the other parents he could have in this world, right? So
like Sir Walter Elliot.
There are people who would be really not good, but Elizabeth in particular, but Darcy too does want what's best. He may not understand how to get there, but I do feel like those two will do a better job with him than certainly others. But I did like seeing sort of the way he was thinking that and sort of navigating. He doesn't really understand it, but he's navigating. I think I can stand it for this long. So I'll say about 2 weeks, and it's really a week and a day. And I think I can do that. I just really found that a compelling way to imagine a new generation, which was exciting. Now tell us a little bit also, because Juliet's also this budding and really fabulous budding character. I just feel like there's so much going on. And so tell us a little bit about creating her as well.
I loved she started to take shape, honestly, when I was asking myself. I named my characters by asking what their parents or whoever raised them would name them, because that tells you a lot about where people come from, expectations that are on somebody. That's just a character building thing that I do. And I realized, Catherine's children are named Juliet, Theodosia, and Albion, because of course Catherine Morland would pick slightly more romantic and fabulous names. And of course Marianne's like, that is so great.
Right.
I love it. So that already made me say, okay, this is somebody who is a little more headstrong and a little more willing to step outside of the mold of these things, and very forthright and curious, which is very much like her mother, except she's been brought up by parents who maybe are a little bit wiser and more involved, so she isn't wondering if people are killing their wives and liking them in the attic. So that was good. And also I realized, sort of developing her very early on, that it's a stock character in historical fiction. We all tend to gravitate to a character who is a little bit more in some ways. They think that this thing we think is stupid about the old days, they also think it's stupid. We're drawn to that, and sometimes that can be a bit of a cheat. There are other times where it makes total sense. I mean, Hilary Mantel's wonderful trilogy is making the case, and his name just completely slipped my mind. Oh my God.
Cromwell?
Yes, thank you. She's making the case that Cromwell is one of the first people with the modern sensibility.
Yeah.
He is emerging from the medieval time, and she's building the whole case for, like, here is how the modern consciousness comes into being. So it's all that's the whole spectrum that you have. And with Juliet, I felt like, her mother, I could make that case and make that plausible, but it also would make her an excellent foil to Jonathan Darcy, who really likes these rules and routine. He relies on them. They're how he navigates the world. So I was like, okay, that's a great character trait for her to have, because it bounces off him, and I get to, between the two of them, I get to explicitly talk about some things, making it clear, like, oh, this is okay, oh, that's not okay, that wouldn't necessarily fit easily into the narrative, but that
Okay.
modern readers might need.
Yeah.
Right.
And the interesting attraction between two people who come out the world very differently, but are sort of learning to appreciate another way, which is it's a great thing to see with Jonathan Darcy, that he's drawn to that a little bit, even though it's so foreign, that kind of approach to life. Yeah.
And in that way, he was very like his dad.
Yes, right. Absolutely. Yes. And we've talked about that, how he's an extension, as you said, Darcy personified her, or that's great.
Darcy,
that's great.
It's actually been interesting. I've heard from more than one reader who said, like, it makes me look at Darcy and wonder, like, even if maybe he's not as affected as his son, is that maybe an element of his character? And I don't know that I would say definitely yes or no, but can I see it? Sure.
Yeah, we've talked about, Lindsey and I've talked about that, wondering.
I was gonna say, it's interesting to have read with Jonathan being neurodivergent, because I think it makes me look at other characters throughout Austen like that, and like especially Darcy, because that's his father, thinking, oh yeah, I think Darcy's a little bit of an anxious soul there, he's got some social anxiety or something, because he even says, I think, to Elizabeth at one point, I don't have the ease that Wickham has speaking to people, or something like that, right? I don't have that. So it's interesting to see, or like maybe Mr. Collins is a little, interesting, to look at.
Sorry, I had to do the eye roll with Mr. Collins.
That lens.
Law.
Mr. Collins. No, that's true. It is an interesting, and it's one of the great things is that your books encourage us to go back to Jane Austen's books and say, oh yeah, I can see this a little bit in Darcy or in Elizabeth. You see how she's behaving and you think, oh yeah, because I saw her do this, at that ball or whatever. So that's really true. That's great.
So I guess we'll kind of wrap up with, so we're obviously big fans. And so we're wondering, I mean, if it's okay, if it's allowed to ask about, if you can tell us what's next for these characters. Will there be another Mr. Darcy, Miss Tilney mystery?
Yes, there will. I'm actually working on final edits for the third, and there will be a fourth. That's as far as I know for now. I'm hoping it'll go on even beyond that. Great. But yes, we have that to look forward to. I think we've been announcing each one in December, so I think you'll get a look at the title and cover then, and that will also let you know which book we are visiting.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
That's something I know we had thought. We were like, maybe we're gonna see some other of the books come into play here. So that'll be really exciting.
That's great.
For sure, we're looking forward to that.
Yes. And we'll definitely share all that.
Books will primarily be in the world of one of the novels. I always joke that you learned you can't get everybody together all the time from Mr. Wickham's spiritual cousin, which is Avengers Infinity War. You can only do it so many times before you lose the thread. So we'll be visiting different books, and there may be like a character or two that appears outside, but I mean, it's great though to get to do that deeper dive into each book. I loved going to Barton. I loved getting to have like Mrs. Jennings. Anytime I needed information to move through the town, it was like, I know who would carry it. And it's 100% in character for her. She's going to learn everything she can, and she's going to broadcast it as widely as she can immediately, which was great. I never had to worry about but how do they learn this?
Right? No, Mrs. Jennings is on it.
Mrs. Jennings will know it. So, but it was great to have Margaret and Mrs. Dashwood and Lucy Steele as was to play with. So that's a real treat, getting to go to these novels and visit not just our main characters that we love, but the supporting characters that are so rich and vivid as well. So that will definitely be occurring at least through a fourth book. And
great.
Go even
well, our fingers are definitely crossed.
I was gonna say we definitely hope for that.
Well, and that's great, because in the first book, everybody comes into the same world, but you don't get the surrounding characters. It's just really the main characters all coming together. So in the second, so then the others will be like that. We go into their worlds. And it really is a great way to revisit these worlds, because you feel like you're right there just a few years later. So that's really great fun.
And I mean, you don't even, or I don't even have to pull hard, because we know from her books, all people did with young people was be like, oh, we have dined with you 4 times. You will come live with us this winter. You know, they did that especially with younger people, these kind of visits, because one, that was one of the few ways to really have a lot of variety and interest in life. And two, it was a thing people did. They introduced young people around widely. That was a function of society, making sure that they met. So of course, all the people that met Jonathan and Juliet in the first book are going to invite them places. That would be what happened. So that is terrific.
It really is very natural. It happens very naturally. So
I will say that starting in the third book, I think I can say this, it is the first time that they are not brought together by chance. Certain letters and conversations have made it known that they have a certain ability in this area. So we're going to avoid the Cabot Cove complex.
Okay, yes.
Where just like, oh, what, again?
Yeah, every time you turn around, there's another body.
Right. They are about to start being specifically sought for, and exactly what that means and how it can be possibly navigated socially is very much a question that they're going to be dealing with.
Oh, that's great. That's great. That is really wonderful, because again, the world's coming together is just terrific. That's great.
Oh, I'm glad you guys are psyched.
Yeah, we're really psyched.
We are.
Yeah, so fun. Well, thank you so much, Claudia, first for writing these great books. You know, they're just amazing. And you have 2 really big fans right here who just can't stop talking about them. So thank you for coming on and sharing with us about these 2 and about the third, and then we'll just look forward to the fourth and hopefully many more to come.
Thank you guys so much for having me on. This was super fun.
Well, great. We want to have just lots of fun discussions. And so seems like a perfect summer special fun thing to do, to imagine the characters from Pride and Prejudice involved in murder mysteries. I mean, there's just nothing better. So you're right. As much as I love P.D. James and that was great, you know, but death has come in a really more exciting way in a lot of cases with these 2 and more to come. So thank you so much, Claudia Gray. I'll have all the information and links in the show notes. Thank you, Lindsey, for joining me this time for the interview. And thank you, everyone, for joining us to go into a world we know and find it's maybe a little more dangerous than we thought, with murders possible. Thank you so much, and we'll talk to everybody again soon. Bye-bye.